the end of the axon.
This is the synapse, where one neuron ends and communicates with another cell. So again, the big picture, dendrites for input, cell body for processing, axons for output. When you get to the end of the axon, you got the synapse. Okay? So there are a few electrical synapses where essentially it's a gap junction and an incoming signal immediately makes the same strength outgoing signal straight through. But there aren't very many of those. And we talked about the fact that you really wouldn't want very many of those. Because that signal would just go straight through. You couldn't process it, you couldn't modify it, you couldn't ignore it, you couldn't change it. Okay? If you had that, why don't you just make a longer axon? Would be just another way to say that. But there are a few places. The majority of our synapses, though, are chemical, where the signal stops at one axon, at the end of the axon, at the synaptic terminal. Then there's a gap called the synaptic cleft, and then there's receptors on the far side. And the beauty of this system, although it does slow things down and produce bottlenecks, is that it produces bottlenecks and slows things down, which allows you to modify, allows you to filter, allows you to turn off signals that you don't want to listen to. Okay? So you have feedback mechanisms that can control this. But we're just going to talk about one going through at this point. So what happens is, axon on the axon shows up. Synaptic vesicles release a neurotransmitter diffuses to the far side, and you get response to the far side. Now, the response to the far side is not always going to be another exponential. The response to the far side might actually be a hyperpolarizing wave, and you shut the next neuron down. The response to the far side might be depolarizing. Okay. There's different types of neurotransmitters, there's different types of receptors, so let's go ahead and talk about the steps involved in a cholinergic receptor. Hold on a second. Let me show you this. So there's synapses, neuron to neuron, neuro to muscular, neuro to glandular. Okay. Neuromuscular can be a skeletal muscle or to cardiac muscle or to smooth muscle. So in the muscular system, all we looked at was neuromuscular skeletal muscle, and the only thing we saw was acetylcholine. But there's others out there. We'll see some of those divergences, the diversities a little later on. When neurons talk to each other, the most logical that we would think of is the axonal terminal of one neuron talks to the synapse of the other. I mean, talks to the dendrite of the other. You know, outgoing talks to incoming. That's most logical. In a few places, though, the outgoing signal from one axon talks directly to the cell body. Bypasses all that filtering and possible loss to go boom. Okay? So this is quite whispering, this is yelling in your ear in terms of the strength of the signal. It's also possible to have an axonal synapse, which is also called neuromodulating, where there's a signal going from this axon to something else. So somebody comes into the side of the conversation and messes with it. You ever talk to somebody else just sort of shows up? Sometimes that helps, don't they? Let me interpret for you. And they facilitate that conversation. Sometimes they show up and go, no, ignore that person. In which case they inhibit. So you can have both facilitating and inhibiting, and we call that neuromodulating. Okay? By the way, I'm assuming that you've read the book and moved forward, that you're ahead of me. Hopefully I'm coming back making this make more sense to you. If this is your first exposure into these concepts, you're going to be going, what do you say? I need some facilitation. All right, so actions at a chemical synapse, and we're going to look specifically at a cholinergic synapse here. Some of this you already know from the muscle unit, but we're going to add a few more details. So here comes incoming exponential. Voltage regulated sodium channels are opening and closing and opening and closing, and that's what produces that exponential that travels. We get down here, and the first thing that happens at that synaptic terminal is we open up channels for calcium. That's something new. We didn't talk about this in muscle before. We did that on purpose because we want to talk about calcium's role in muscle contraction before. Now we're talking about its role in nervous signaling. Calcium comes in. Based on the amount of calcium coming in, that's how much neurotransmitter is released. Remember calmodulin, one of the proteins in smooth muscle that respond to calcium? It's in the synaptic terminal of the axons, and it's what says, oh, calcium's in. That tells me to get the vesicles to do exocytosis and spit the stuff out. Okay? So the amount of calcium, directly proportional to the amount of calcium coming in, that's how much neurotransmitter you release. So it's in faster signals, or somehow facilitate the calcium, and you get more neurotransmitter being released. If it's and we're doing a cholinergic receptor, so let's say it's acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is released, it diffuses across the gap, and by the way, and then it has to bind to receptor on the far side. And one thing about the binding, it's a loose binding. In other words, here comes the neurotransmitter, just sort of catch it in your hand. You don't grab it, hold it, just lightly hold onto it, which means it falls off and can rebond and fall off and so forth. Okay, so don't think about neurotransmitter release binding to the far side. Like, I'll never let you go. Some cases it's very loose. And in the case of acetylcholine, when we demonstrated this the other day, it just breaks its back when it catches it. There you go. There's actually an enzyme that destroys it after it's binding. So it's a very quick binding, and the binding to the receptor generates a graded potential on the postsynaptic side. Now, if that graded potential is depolarizing, we call that an excitatory postsynaptic potential. If the incoming graded potential that you generate for this neurotransmitter is hyperpolarizing, we call that an inhibitory postsynaptic potential. PSP simply means postsynaptic potential. So we're talking about what's happening on the far side. It's either getting excited or inhibited. In this case, by excited or inhibited means the far side neuron is either getting closer to depolarizing, that's excitatory, or getting further from depolarizing. That's inhibitory. Okay? Now, how do we turn so the response is quick. Neurotransmitter shows up, respond. How do we turn off that response so it doesn't keep going forever and ever? Well, one way we just demonstrated with acetylcholine. Acetylcholine shows up, you catch it and break it. So enzymatic degradation. So there's an enzyme like acetylcholinesterase that rapidly turns off, actually destroys the neurotransmitter and turns the signal back off. This allows for a rapid on-off, and precise control. This is the one we see in the neuromuscular junctions. You want to be able to move your arm and stop. You move your arm and stop. If you had a slow turn off, you go move it, stop, whoops, too late, right? So precise control. A slower way, but still fast enough, is reuptake. So I release the neurotransmitter, and I take it back. And I release it, and I take it back. And I release it, and I take it back. Now, the response on the far side is based on how much neurotransmitter is actively binding to the receptor, not the total amount of neurotransmitter that's in the body. Okay? So there are chemicals that can block the reuptake. For example, one of the neurotransmitters that gets reuptake is serotonin, and they're a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or serotonin selective reuptake inhibitors. So serotonin is released, reuptake is blocked. Like Prozac or Praxil, some of those things. I'm not reuptaking. It has to stay out there. Now, what's happening when it stays out there is it's binding, releasing, but it says it's not being reuptake, it's going to bind again. Okay. Now, the third way to get rid of a neurotransmitter is just to wait. Let diffusion. So as it's binding and releasing and binding and releasing, at some point it releases, finds its way out in the bloodstream and just floats away somewhere. And out in the body, in fact in all cells of your body, the liver has a little bit more of this, there are these enzymes that destroy neurotransmitters. Okay? These are called, they're one of the most common neurotransmitters are based on a single amino acid, so there's monoamine oxidases that block the monoamine oxidase, that break down the monoamines, the oxidizing. So some of the neurotransmitters that are out there might be causing anxiety, and some of them might be causing depression. And some of them you don't have enough of. So what they found to control some people's moods is if we could just inhibit the monoamine oxidase, what neurotransmitter you're making has more of an effect. So they call those MAOIs. So one of the treatment for anxiety is MAOI, or, MAOI. That's how I would treat anxiety. Ultimately, the neural response is determined by two different things. Which neurotransmitter is released, this one or this one, and who's the receptor for it. So the same neurotransmitter, let's say it's norepinephrine, there are some receptors that say, oh, no, norepinephrine, you're here. I'm excited. Norepinephrine, you're here. I'm inhibited. So it's the interplay between the receptor and the neurotransmitter that determines the ultimate response. And so I'll give you an example of this for this class. I'm going to go back to the last test, and I'm going to give everybody a 75% on the last test. Some of you are like, woohoo, good news. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
I worked hard to earn my grade. I don't want to drop down to 75%. So it's the same message for me, 75%. That's your new grade. Some of you are excited, some of you are inhibited. It's based on the receptor more so than the message, or the messenger. By the way, I can reverse that. No, I'm not changing the grades. Yeah. Now, right? So a different messenger, we get just our response. So the receptor mechanisms, some of them are direct, some of them are indirect. Direct ones, the neurotransmitter shows up, they bind to receptors and immediately open up a gate. That's how acetylcholine and glutamate work. Okay? In some cases, it's an indirect with a two-messenger system. So you bind a receptor, where is it? You bind to receptor. That receptor turns on something inside the cell. The something inside the cell makes some changes, one of which will open a channel. But there'll be other changes as well. So the indirect route is a little slower. Still in the millisecond range, you won't notice the difference. But it's a little longer lasting. Okay. By the way, there are hormones that work in the same method. Same sort of receptor, second messenger system. And by the way, some chemicals work as both neurotransmitters and as hormones. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. Norepinephrine is a hormone and a neurotransmitter. Depends on where it's being released and where it's binding. So if it's released directly at a synapse onto a receptor, it's a neurotransmitter. If it's dumped in the bloodstream and circulates around the whole body before it finds a receptor, it's acting as a hormone. Okay. So the ultimate result of how many outgoing signals you get is based on the incoming signals. And typically, one single incoming signal is not enough to reach threshold. In fact, that's what I'll show you this here. So one incoming signal didn't quite reach threshold. Here's another signal, it doesn't reach threshold. But what if you got both those signals at the same time? Half plus half adds up to 1, you reach threshold. So they call that temporal summation if it's based on time. Maybe you'll get multiple signals from different areas. So I'm a neuron, here's all my dendrites. This dendrite felt something, wasn't enough. This dendrite felt something, wasn't enough. But both dendrites together adds up. And since they're coming from slightly different locations, we would call that spatial summation. Okay. And by the way, at any one point in time, you could be receiving some inhibitory signals, some excitatory signals at the same time. I got some good news and some bad news. I'm not going to finish that. But just imagine you get some good news, bad news. If the good news is really good, the bad news is not so bad. If the bad news is really bad, the good news is suddenly lost. And that's what's happening with excitatory and inhibitory signals. Okay, I will give you good news. I say 50% using switching GIGO. No. Okay. Bad news is there's a nuclear warhead heading away.
So much conscience.
Yeah, there's a commercial that has that in there somewhere. So if you receive excitatory and inhibitory at the same time, they might cancel each other out. Okay, but ultimately there's lots of incoming signals at the same time, and that's what synaptic integration is. Making sense of all these different signals at once. So before I can finish talking about the case study, I want to bring this in, and then we'll go right to where this fits with the case study. So there's presynaptic modification, also called modulation. Remember how an axon can talk to an axon? So here's a signal pathway, and here's some interloper trying to come in and mess with that signal. This is the neuromodulator that's coming in from the side. Or do it this way, blue is trying to talk to purple. We're having a blue to purple conversation. Green says, hey, I'm going to interfere with that. Okay, that's neuromodulation. Now it could be either excitatory or inhibitory. So GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. What happens with GABA is when GABA is released, it blocks these calcium channels. Doesn't turn them all off, it just slows them down some. So here comes an incoming signal, less calcium, less total neurotransmitter. So to put some numbers on it, now these are fictional numbers, I don't know what the actual numbers would be, but let's just say 10 signals per second coming in. Nobody's messing with the conversation. 10 in, 3 out. 10 in, 3 out. That's normal. Let's just say that's normal. 10, 3, 10, 3. GABA says 10, 1. 10, 1. 10, 1. It slows things down. Serotonin is a facilitator. It shows up, it activates the calcium channels. That means there's more neurotransmitter left. Now, instead of 10, 3, 10, 3, with serotonin, 10, 4, 10, 5, 10, 6, right? It makes things go faster, 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 faster. Okay? So that's what you mean by serotonin being a facilitator. It may not be part of the primary pathway, but it makes the pathway work a little better. Okay? So let's take a look at, sort of make a jump. This is back to Roman number 5, a clinical developmental down where it talks about anxiety and depression. I put a little notes in there. And this is my way of simplifying this to some degree. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it. And I was hoping one of the psychology professors is going to observe my class. And we were trying to make it happen today, but it didn't work out. This would have been the perfect time for her to be here. She could have given us a psychological perspective of this that might have changed my oversimplification. So let's talk about anxiety and depression in general, and then we'll talk about how SSRI works. And we'll probably get in a little public service safety announcement built into this. All right. So anxiety and depression occur, each of them occur at 2 levels. They occur at the neuron synaptic cellular level, which is where chemicals work, or they can occur, or they're occurring at the whole person level. So what depression is at the chemical level, the neurons are firing slowly. Slowly. At the whole person level, it's
Totally does that.
What do you want? Yeah. I think no. Eh. By the way, that's not necessarily sad. There are people perfectly happy being depressed. What do you want to do? Nothing. What do you want to do tomorrow? Nothing. What did you guys say? Nothing. Okay. You're not necessarily sad to be depressed. You can be, but clinical depression, from a psychological perspective, is when your depression starts interfering with what you really want to do. You know, like you used to be a happy person, want to do things, now you don't want to do things. No, you're clinically depressed. You don't have to have a psychology degree to make that diagnosis. You have to have a psychology degree or a psychiatric degree or the right kind of degree to give you medicines. But anybody can say, hey, you're down, let me help you out a little bit. All right? So that's depression. Oh, by the way, with depression and sadness and other things, maybe there's suicidal tendencies. Maybe not. You can be depressed and not suicidal. Okay? But let's just say you are. Or let's just say, for sake of a discussion, somebody else. What do they do about it? Nothing. Because they don't want to do anything. So they may have a suicidal thought, but they usually don't act on it because they're not going to act on anything. Okay? Again, I'm oversimplifying, and I add my own weird humor in here, and I apologize if I offend you with my weird humor. But I'm trying to use that to sort of make the point. Now, what is anxiety at the chemical level? One signal fires, no signal fires, no signal fires, no signal, just going really quick. What is it at the whole person level? I have a lab practical next week. If I don't pass the lab practical, I don't pass the course. If I don't pass the course, I don't get nursing school. I don't get nursing school, I don't get a job, I don't get a job, I die. If I don't pass the test, I die.
I know, right?
How many of you felt that, right? Okay. So, traditionally speaking, in the world of psychiatric and psychotropic drugs, the way you treated anxiety was you gave somebody a depressant. You'd give them some sort of GABA. In fact, if you hear about, there's a new drug for diabetic pain, diabetic neuropathy. It's called, it's generic, pregabalin. It's actually GABA.
It's not gabapentin.
You're actually giving somebody GABA.
Gabapentin?
Gabapentin is one of them. I'm trying to think of Lyrica. That's a pregabalin. That's,
same thing.
You're giving them a depressant, a strong depressant, to shut down the pain. Okay. But what happens when you actually? I'm sorry, it's not a strong one. It's a pretty weak one. That's why they can give it the way they do it. But if you give somebody a strong depressant, depress everything, their new normal is depressed. You stop taking the depressant, and your anxiety comes back worse. That's how it gets very dependent. Now, what if you have depression? The traditional method of treating depression was to give somebody a stimulant. Okay. Ephedrine. Oh, by the way, that's what they give people that have ADD.
Mm-hmm.
Adderall and those kind of things. Like, so you have problems keep focusing your attention, so we're going to give you a stimulant. That'll help. They think if they over-hyper you, then you can hyper-focus. But it doesn't do much to the... Anyway, so that was a tradition there. So, but what if you keep taking these stimulants after a while, you're like, I'm used to that stimulant, normal levels of body functioning are too slow, you need the stimulant again. So these are very addictive drugs. And then they discovered that serotonin as a neuromodulator actually modulated both sides of this equation and pushed you back toward middle. So more push toward the middle, you can normalize both anxiety and depression. So they found out that they could selectively block the reuptake of serotonin, and you got more serotonin, you got more modulation, less anxiety, less depression. So in your case study, that's what Anne had. Anne took. Anne had anxiety, and so she took the SSRIs, and it worked for her. By blocking reuptake, the serotonin didn't stay. There wasn't more serotonin in the brain. There's if you look at your page, a lot of you say that. And there's actually a website that say that. Increased amount of serotonin in the brain. No, there's no more serotonin necessarily. Just the serotonin that's there is in the synapses longer. Okay. So it works both for anxiety and for depression. Now, what happened to alcoholic Al there in the case study? He had anxiety. Why did he not want to take SSRIs? Do what? No. He could probably keep drinking with SSRIs.
He wouldn't want to, though.
He wouldn't want to. But it's worse to do alcohol and anxiety and the diazepam. So why did he not want SSRI? She had no problems with it, but he did. That's your clue.
Because of testosterone?
It sort of inhibits testosterone and other.
Oh, gynecomastia.
No, well, there might be some. And actually, what happens is it decreases libido,
Oh.
sexual response. Yeah, there might be some so it's blocking gynecomastia. So a lot of guys don't want SSRIs for that reason. So he said, "Give me the old-fashioned diazepam instead." Right? Now, GABA plus alcohol, you have two different central nervous system depressants. You put the two together and
You're
that's going to put you in a coma. By the way, who's ever taken a muscle relaxer? I have an open prescription for a Flexero right now. For my
CNS depressant.
there is no such thing as a muscle relaxer. Does not exist. That's what they label it. It's really a
CNS depressant.
brain relaxer. They're all depressants. How much alcohol should you drink while taking a muscle relaxer?
None.
None. In fact, here is a good way. Here's something you do. So, a lot of your friends are like, oh, you're taking AMP. You know about these drugs. Have you had a conversation like that already? Mm-hmm. You're taking AMP. You know this now, right? No. AMP1. I'm not even through with the semester. But here's something you can do. Write this down on a piece of paper. Put it on a little note card. Keep it with you. And whenever somebody asks you, can I drink alcohol with this drug? You go, Dr. Bridges gave you the answer to that. I wrote it on this card. If it says on this card, what drug is it again? Doesn't matter what they say. You ask them, listen carefully, go, no. Right there, it says no. Because if alcohol doesn't interact with that drug, not drinking it isn't going to make it worse. If it does interact, it's going to cause problems. So if you just say no, that's definitely on the safe side. By the way, alcohol interacts with drugs. In the case of GABA and alcohol, they're working on the same system. So they add up. They synergistically. In some cases, alcohol interferes with the enzymes that break down the drugs. So the drug is magnified. In some cases, it intensifies the enzymes. Or I should say, in some cases, the drugs have to be broken down for the active. So there's all kinds of interesting interactions that are out there. By the way, there's also nutrichemicals, phytonutrients, so that people, I'm taking St. John's wort for this. It might interact with the drug. So make sure if you're doing, or if you know anybody that's taking any of those natural supplements and stuff, run through that list of natural supplements with your doctor. You're going to get a new prescription. I don't know which food it was that interferes with the blood thinning drugs. Broccoli. Broccoli interferes with blood thinning drugs.
Anything with vitamin K.
So you're taking a blood thinning drug and you eat broccoli. Like, you just counteracted what you're supposed to be doing there. Okay, so make sure you do that. Be careful with those drug interactions. Already does that. Oh, ultimately, neural integration is immensely complex. And one last thing about, or not one last thing, but another thing about drugs, think about this, is the synapses are either out of the peripheral nervous system. Many of the ones that we take for psychotropic drugs are actually in the central nervous system. So you take a pill, it gets into the bloodstream, circulates out the entire body. It's going to bind to whatever it binds to. So you might be aiming for it to have this effect on this part of your brain, but has a side effect on this other part of your brain. Or has a side effect on some other neuromuscular junction. Right? So think about all the nuances out there, and we're AMP1. You're not going to be prescribing drugs based on this course. Anybody going on to become a nurse practitioner? That's your long-term goal? Not you two personally, but in general, that scares me. It scares me that I'm teaching people that can prescribe drugs to me later. It says, I better be... Oh, luckily there's another class you'll take for that. You'll take a pharmacology course from a pharmacist before you get to that point.
Baby
but I always like
steps.
to try to lay some foundation. So one last thing about SSRIs and depression let's skip this. So some people are depressed and they may also be suicidal. Okay. If you're depressed and suicidal, you're not as likely to act on it. Okay. When you give somebody the SSRI for depression, you fix the chemical level. Did you fix the psychological level?
Nope.
You just gave them enough energy to act on the thoughts that they were having the whole time. So those of you that might be in a position to prescribe drugs, always remember this: never prescribe psychotropic drugs. I'm going to stop there. Without a strong psychological support system, whether it's formal counseling, informal friend group, it's something. You need a support group to go with that. And there is recognized an increased rate of suicides with people taking SSRIs, especially if they're teenagers. As they become more adult, you see a little less of that. Now that might just be the myelination of the prefrontal cortex that says, don't do that. There might also be more support networks and so forth. The other thing with those statistics is females are more likely to attempt suicide, and males are more likely to be successful. And that also goes, that's
The method.
Focused on veterans, because more of them are male, and they know how to kill people. So if they make a decision and they act on it, they're a lot more likely to be successful. Which is why the rates of veteran suicide go up or are up. One estimate is 22 veterans a day commit suicide in the country. Now that's veterans from all conflicts. And right now, most of them are still, oddly enough, Vietnam veterans. And then the non-Vietnam veterans, it's actually high. There was one study that has a slightly higher rate of people that did not deploy to combat zones. Non-combat veterans more so than combat veterans. Yeah. Now that's only one study, so I don't know how much that's holding up. But it's not, so be careful. Don't just say, "Oh yeah, you're a veteran, you're suicidal." No. You're a veteran, you have PTSD. No. Some of us do. But yeah, a lot of non-veterans have PTSD too.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to get to a good stopping point here. Oh, I'm sort of already there. Let's just see what's left on. So your action potential is made by the sodium channels opening and closing back. What happens if you block the sodium channels?
Block the action
You
potential.
block the action potential. So what happened to old Pufferfish Paul?
Blocked all his action potential.
So he